My dad didn't just yell at me, he hurled a burning cup of coffee right at my face, all because I refused to hand his precious stepson my car and my credit card, like I was some kind of spare part he could strip for parts. "Give him everything or get out," he screamed, veins, bulging eyes wild, and I did exactly what he said. I walked out. Quiet. Calm. No suitcase. No goodbye. Just the sound of my own footsteps leaving the house I helped pay for. But the real story didn't start when I left. It started when they came home. The front door swung open. Lights flicked on. And the whole house was empty. Cleared out. Silent. Except for one thing. A man in a suit was sitting in the living room waiting for them. And he was there. For me. My name is Zara Lynx, and this is the moment everything I thought I knew about family shattered. But before I share my story with you, I want to know you're here with me. Just say, listening in the comments, or tell me where you're watching from. Sometimes even the smallest connection can make a story feel heard. Thank you. And now, here's my story. And if my story hits something inside you, even a small part, please consider subscribing. It helps more than you know, and it lets me keep telling the truth the way it deserves to be told. Now, let me start from the beginning. By the time my dad walked into an empty house and saw a man in a suit sitting in his living room waiting for him that morning, already felt like a different lifetime. But it started the way most disasters do in my family. Quiet, ordinary, pretending nothing was wrong. My name is Zara Lynx Montague. I was 29, still living in my father's house out in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon, with his new wife Serena Mercer Montague and her son Jax. On paper, we were a blended family. In reality, I was the built-in maid who happened to share my father's last name. That morning, Portland was doing what Portland does best: gray sky, steady drizzle light seeping into the kitchen in a tired, washed-out way. I was up before the sun, padding across the cold tile, cracking eggs into a skillet, dropping bacon into a pan, loading slices of bread into the toaster. Coffee gurgled in the machine, the smell filling the house long before anyone else bothered to get out of bed. I moved on autopilot, setting out plates, refilling the fruit bowl, wiping a counter that was already clean. The air felt wrong, though. Not peaceful, but tight, like a guitar string tuned a half step too high. I remember thinking something's going to snap today. In that house, I was the daughter, but most days it felt like I was staff. I bought the groceries scheduled. The repairs paid half the bills when my dad's stroke had wiped out our savings. I'd sat by his bed in the hospital, then gone straight to Montague's Home Market, our family's little store in East Portland, to keep it from going under. When he couldn't stand behind the counter anymore, I redesigned the front, handled the vendors, built a loyalty program from scratch, answered emails until midnight. On top of that, I had my own career. I worked remote as an interior and architectural designer, bringing in steady money, and more than once I dipped into my own savings to cover the store's inventory when the numbers didn't add up. But in that house, none of that made me an owner or an heir. It just made me useful. I was sliding bacon onto a plate when I heard his footsteps. Elliot Montague shuffled into the kitchen in a faded t-shirt and flannel pants, hair sticking up, jaw set like it always was when he'd decided something before he even spoke. He didn't say good morning. He never did. He went straight to the coffee machine, poured himself a mug of black coffee so strong it could have stripped paint. That was his ritual, his little ceremony of control. He sat at the head of the table, looked at the plates I'd set out, and said nothing. I tried anyway. "Sleep okay?" I asked. "Fine," he muttered, eyes on his coffee, not on me. The silence stretched. I could feel him winding up. When he finally spoke, his voice was strangely calm. "Jax is having a hard time," he said, like it was the opening statement in a trial. "Lost his job. He's trying to get something going, talking to people, interviewing. He needs some help." I didn't say anything yet. I just waited. "He'll need your car today," my dad went on. "And your credit card. Just until he gets settled." He said it the way some dads ask you to pass the salt. Routine. Expected. Already decided. He didn't ask if I could do it. He told me. You work online, he added like that. Invalidated my entire life. You don't need the car during the week. And money you make is still family money. You live here, you eat here. Time you did something big for this family, for the man who's going to carry Montagues into the future. Jax. Serena's son. The future of the store, according to my dad. The man of the house, even as he floated from job to job. I felt my chest tighten. In my head, a highlight reel started playing the time I paid the overdue electric bill. So the freezers at the store wouldn't shut off the months I put inventory on my own credit card. So we didn't lose vendors the grand reopening where Jax cut the ribbon for the cameras, while I stood off to the side in clothes that still smelled like fresh paint. Every time I'd told myself it was for the family. Every time I'd swallowed the sour taste and kept going, but something in me had run out. No, I said. Just that. Quiet, clear, like I was testing how the word felt in my mouth. My dad's spoon stopped halfway to his lips. He stared at me like I'd just switched languages. What did you say? I said no, I repeated, and my own voice surprised me. No tremor, no apology. I need my car for work for my life, and my credit card is my responsibility. I can't just hand it to Jax. The first crack in his control showed in the way his jaw clenched. Then the flood. You're selfish, he snapped. Ungrateful. You think that little online job makes you better than him? Jax is a man. He's trying. He's the one who's going to keep this family business alive. He jabbed a finger at me. What do you even do, Zara? Sit at a laptop and doodle. You'd be nowhere without this roof over your head. I tried one last time to stay reasonable. I talked about the nights I closed the store alone, the vendor relationships I'd built, the late payments I'd quietly fixed. But he didn't want to hear it. He never had. That's when he stood up so fast his chair scraped the tile. He grabbed his mug still steaming, and before my brain could process what was happening, the cup left his hand. Hot coffee arced through the air and hit my cheek. My neck seeping through my shirt onto my shoulder. My skin screamed. I didn't. For a second time froze the smell of bitter coffee, the sting, the clink of ceramic on tile when the mug shattered at my feet. My dad's chest was heaving, eyes wild, and all I could think was, he just chose his wife's son over me, and he did it with a weapon. Give him everything, he roared, or get out of my house. His house. Not ours. Not mine. Behind him, Serena appeared in the doorway, arms crossed over her silk robe. She didn't rush to me. Didn't ask if I was burned. Can we not make a scene first thing in the morning? She sighed like I was the one who'd thrown something. Her body language said everything. This was already decided. I was the problem. Something in me went very, very still. The pain on my skin was sharp, but what hurt more was the clarity. I wasn't part of this family, not in any way that mattered when things got inconvenient. I wiped coffee from my face with the back of my hand, turned without a word, and walked upstairs. In my room, I locked the door, stripped off the soaked shirt, and stood under the shower until the water ran cool and my skin stopped throbbing. I dabbed aloe on the reddest spots, pulled on a clean sweater, and started packing like I'd been waiting for this moment for years. Laptop, sketchbooks, a few pairs of jeans, underwear, socks, my passport, my social security card. The things you grab when you don't know where you're going, just that you're not staying. At the bottom of my dresser was a drawer I didn't open often. Inside was a small leather notebook that had belonged to my mother, Lydia. She'd died years before Serena showed up with her perfect hair and her perfect son. I picked up the notebook, thumbed through pages filled with my mom's tidy handwriting recipes and little store notes before a metallic glint caught my eye. Taped between two pages was a small key and a line in her handwriting, "Bend storage. Keep what matters most." I stared at those words until they blurred. My mom hadn't trusted everything to stay safe in my father's hands. She'd hidden something away. For me. I put the notebook and the key in my bag. I didn't write a note. There was nothing left to say that would change who they were. When I went back downstairs, the kitchen smelled like scorched coffee and bacon gone cold. Serena watched me from the island, lips pressed thin but didn't speak. Jax was just coming in, the back door, keys jingling in his hand, expression confused when he saw my duffel and the car keys in my grip. "What's going on?" he started, but I walked right past him. No fight. No explanation. I had given them enough of my words. Outside, the drizzle had turned to real raindrops, spotting the driveway in dark circles. I slid into the driver's seat, closed the door, and for a second just sat there, listening to the rain drum on the roof. Then I turned the key. As I backed out, I glanced at the rearview mirror. The house shrank behind me, a gray blur dissolving in the rain. I didn't look back again. If this wasn't my home anymore, the only direction that mattered was forward. I drove with no destination, just streets I'd known my whole life, turning unfamiliar under the weight sitting in my chest. The burn on my neck throbbed every time the seatbelt brushed it, but that wasn't where it truly hurt. The real wound was quieter, the realization that my father hadn't seen his daughter standing there in that kitchen. He'd seen an obstacle, an ATM with feelings he didn't care to manage. As the wipers dragged across the windshield, my mind flipped through other mornings, other small humiliations I'd filed away as not a big deal. Decisions about the store made without me, holiday plans I found out about through Facebook jokes at my expense, about being married to my laptop whenever I stayed late to finish designs after closing the shop. I'd told myself for years that if I just worked harder, loved them more, they'd treat me like I belonged. That lie didn't fit anymore. I pulled over in Nob Hill outside a tiny cafe wedged between a boutique and a plant shop. It was the kind of place with mismatched chairs and plants in the window, the kind I used to daydream about redesigning. I killed the engine but didn't go inside. I just sat there staring at the stiff brown stain drying on my collar, a literal mark of how small I'd let myself become in that house. Eventually, I grabbed my phone and opened Facebook. My thumb hovered, muscle memory taking me straight to a group Serena had made, Montague Mercer Tribe, Our Family. The top post was a fresh photo album, Our Growing Legacy. Serena's caption was full of heart emojis and hashtags. Picture after picture flashed across my screen, Jax behind the Montague's home market register, grinning like he'd been born there. My dad, arms slung around his shoulders, pride radiating off him in a way I hadn't seen directed at me since before my mom died. "So proud of our son for turning the store around and taking it to the next level," the caption read. There were photos of the remodeled front, the new signage, the cozy reading nook in the corner I'd designed down to the lamp and the paint color. My work. My ideas. But in the entire album I was nowhere. Cropped out. Never invited. Like I'd never existed in those rooms at all. I scrolled further and my stomach dropped. Serena had shared a local news article from a few months back. Montague's Home Market, How a Family Business Reinvented Itself. Thanks to Jax Mercer. The article was a love letter to Jax. It called him the founder's nephew who came back to save the store, talked about how he'd spearheaded the rebrand, introduced an organic section, and created a community corner where neighbors could sit and read. Every single one of those ideas had come out of my notebooks, my late nights, my conversations with customers. My name wasn't mentioned once. I hadn't been miscredited. I'd been erased. A bitter laugh caught in my throat. Inside the house, I was a burden who needed to do something useful. Outside in the story, they told the world I didn't exist at all. It wasn't just that they didn't see me as a daughter. They didn't see me at all. Something cold settled behind my ribs. I flicked over to Maps and typed in the address of Montague's home market, even though I could have driven there blindfolded. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I needed to know if I was overreacting, if the knot in my gut was just hurt feelings or something darker. The rain had softened to a mist by the time I pulled up outside the store in East Portland. This building had been my second home since I was old enough to reach the counter, the place my mom used to let me ring up customers on an old register, the place I'd slept on the office couch during inventory weekends in college. Now, standing across the street, I almost didn't recognize it. The front had a slick new sign stretching across the facade, Mercer and Montague Market, Est 1974, by Serena Mercer and Jax Mercer. My mother's name, Lydia Montague, was gone. My dad's name was tucked away in a smaller font, an afterthought. And me, I'd never been on the sign to begin with. Through the glass, I could see bright posters and flyers taped up. I crossed the street, drawn closer like I was walking up to a crime scene. There was Jax in glossy photos, shaking hands with a supplier, cutting a ribbon, holding a microphone at what looked like a community meeting. A slick poster announced a neighborhood initiative led by our youngest executive director, Jax Mercer. There it was, in bold, the narrative. He wasn't just helping. He was the savior, the architect, the face. And if he was the hero of the story, then there was no role left for me except to disappear. Standing under the awning, rain dripping off the edge inches from my shoes, memories clicked into place in a way I'd never let myself see before. Serena asking all sugar if Jax could shadow me at the store just to learn. My dad telling me to show him everything so he understands what you do. Shadowing turned into Jax taking my closing shifts to give me a break, then me being scheduled in the back while he worked the floor. When a local reporter came to do a piece on the store's comeback, Elliot had nudged me behind a display and said, "Let the kid have this, huh?" While Jax smiled into the camera. And months ago, when my dad talked about consolidating paperwork for simplicity, I'd sat at the dining table signing forms he slid toward me, trusting his word, not noticing what lines I was agreeing to. Now my mind replayed that scene with a sickening new angle. What had I given away without realizing it? Through the window, I watched Jax laugh with a customer leaning casually against the counter I'd sanded and stained myself. The place looked warm, inviting, successful. And there was no trace of me. Not in the photos, not in the captions, not in the version of the story being told to this neighborhood. This morning hadn't been a random explosion. It was the final move in a long, quiet campaign to push me out of my own life. It felt like someone had slowly peeled my name off every wall, every document, every story they told about who had built this place. One face flickered in my memory, Kaya Bennett, our former inventory manager. She'd been the only one to ever pull me aside in the stockroom and say, "Zara, this isn't right. They're pushing you out." She'd quit 6 months ago, saying she couldn't breathe in the toxicity anymore. Back then, I'd told myself she was being dramatic. Now, I knew better. My hand shook a little as I pulled out my phone, not from fear, but from the feeling of finally reaching for something outside the script my family had handed me. I scrolled to Kaya's number and hit call. She picked up on the second ring. "Zara, hey," I said, and my voice surprised me by how steady it sounded. "I think it's time I stop pretending none of this is happening. Can we meet? There are things I need to understand." There was a pause, then a soft exhale. "I've been waiting for you to say that," she replied. "I kept some things you were never meant to see. Tell me where you are." After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, the storefront reflection overlapping with my own face in the glass. I reached into my bag and pulled out my mom's leather notebook, flipping to the page where the little key was still taped. "Ben Storage, keep what matters most." For years, I'd thought of that line as one of her practical notes, just another errand she never got to. Now it felt like a message she'd sent into the future, aimed straight at this version of me. For the first time, the thought struck me with full force: maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wasn't imagining the way my life had been rewritten without my consent. I looked from the key in my hand to the glowing sign above the door, Mercer and Montague Market, and made myself a promise. I would go see Kaya. I would find out what she'd saved. And if I had to, I'd drive all the way to Bend and open whatever door my mother had locked for me. Because if they could erase me from a sign this easily, what else had they erased from the paperwork I never got to read? Kaya's apartment in Southeast Portland felt more like home in the first 5 seconds than my father's house had in years. It was small, and a little cluttered papers stacked on the coffee table, a laundry basket half-folded in the corner, plants hanging in mismatched pots. It smelled like cinnamon tea and something baked recently. When she opened the door and saw the red mark on my neck, her eyes widened for just a beat, but she didn't gasp or demand explanations. She just stepped aside and said, "Get in here. I'll put the kettle on." I sank onto her couch, the springs familiar from nights we'd spent venting about customers and inventory, and Serena's endless suggestions. Kaya moved around the kitchen metal clinking kettle, hissing. When she finally sat across from me, mug in hand, she didn't push. "Tell me," she said quietly. So I did. I told her everything, my dad ordering me to hand over my car and my credit card like I was a spare parts shelf, me telling him no, the coffee cup leaving his hand, the burn, the words "give him everything" or "get out" echoing in that kitchen. Her face went still, not surprised, just sad. "I figured it would come to this," she said when I finished. "They've never seen you as part of the long-term plan, Zara. Just the support beam they could rip out once they thought the structure was strong enough without you." I stared into my tea, the steam fogging my vision. "What plan?" I asked. "I thought we were just surviving together." Kaya shook her head. "No, they were rearranging the pieces. You just weren't supposed to notice." She set her mug down and leaned forward. "Do you remember a few months back when I texted you that I saw something weird in the office?" I frowned, searching my memory. "You said you saw Serena there after hours, but I thought she was just hovering like she always does." Kaya let out a humorless laugh. "She wasn't just hovering. I walked in to grab a file and saw Serena and your dad in the office with some notary I'd never seen before. Jax was there too. He had a stack of documents under his arm. I heard him say it was just the ownership consolidation package for the grant application to clean things up." As soon as they saw me, they shut up. 2 weeks later, I started getting cut out of every meeting. That's when I decided to leave. She stood up and disappeared into her bedroom, returning with a worn manila envelope. She set it on the coffee table between us like it was something fragile. "I didn't know if I'd ever show you this," she said, "but I kept it because I had a feeling." My stomach clenched as I slid the papers out. On top was a photocopy of a legal-looking document with a title that made my hands go cold: "Voluntary Transfer and Consolidation of Ownership. Zara Lynx Montague to Elliot Montague and Jax Mercer." My name stared back at me from the bottom of the page, followed by a signature that was supposed to be mine. The room seemed to tilt. I'd seen my own name signed on 1,000 emails, receipts, design contracts. I knew the rhythm of my signature the way I knew the lines on my own palm. This wasn't it. The Z was looped too wide, the L in links dragged down like someone guessing how I'd flourish it. It looked like a photocopy of a performance of my name. "That's not me," I whispered. "I never signed this." Kaya nodded slowly. "I didn't think you did. I only got a few seconds to look at it, but I recognized your name, and that it didn't feel right. I made a copy when I had a chance. I knew if I didn't, it might disappear." My brain raced ahead, slotting this new horror into place with everything else I'd seen that day. The new sign, the articles, the way my dad had spoken to me that morning like I was already an intruder. If this had been notarized and filed then on paper, I'd already handed over whatever share I had in the store. They could use it as collateral, restructure it, sell it, and legally, I would be a ghost. That coffee cup in the kitchen wasn't a random explosion. It was the victory lap of someone who believed the paperwork had already erased me. I set the document down, forcing myself to breathe. "If this is real in the system," I said slowly, I have no legal claim. And they know it. Maybe Kaya said carefully. Or maybe they just think you'll never look. I reached into my bag and pulled out my mother's leather notebook, flipping it open to the page with the taped key. I turned it so Kaya could see. She wrote this, I said. Ben storage. Keep what matters most. Kaya's eyes softened with a kind of old grief. I remember your mom talking about that, she said. Back when I first started at the store, she told me she didn't like leaving all the documents where your father or whoever's whispering in his ear could get to them. She said there should always be originals somewhere Elliot couldn't reach. It hit me then how much my mother had seen, even while I was still convincing myself things would get better. She'd trusted me enough to leave a map, but I'd been too busy trying to earn love to follow it. I sat back the key, heavy in my hand. I had two choices, and they both hurt. I could walk away, pretend none of this existed, build a life from scratch somewhere else, and let them win the story. Or I could step into the mess, into laws and ledgers and things I'd always avoided, and find out what was actually mine. Not because I cared about the money more than my sanity, but because I couldn't keep living as the villain in a story they'd rewritten around me. I'm done being the grateful extra, I said finally. If my name is on something, I want to see it. I want to know what my mom left. I'm going to Bend. Kaya's answer was immediate. Then I'm going with you, she said. I helped Lydia organize that storage unit years ago. I know how she filed things, and I'm not letting you walk into this alone. She mentioned she had a car, but I shook my head. We're taking mine, I said, gripping my keys a little tighter. He wanted it gone so badly he can watch me drive it into my own future. We agreed to leave that afternoon. If we needed to, we'd find a cheap motel in Bend and come back the next day. As I stood to go, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from a number I knew by heart even without a name. My father. You made your choice. Don't expect to come back if you push this too far. I stared at the screen for a long second, then locked the phone and slid it into my pocket. Everything okay? Kaya asked. He's just confirming what I already knew, I said. That I'm not welcome unless I'm useful to him. Which means I have nothing left to lose. An hour later, we were on the highway, rain streaking across the windshield, the little metal key from my mother resting on the dashboard, catching the gray Oregon light like a promise I hadn't known I was allowed to keep. The drive from Portland to Bend takes about 3 hours if the weather cooperates. That day, the sky stayed low and heavy, but the roads were clear. We climbed out of the city into the damp green spine of Oregon, past dark fir trees and fog clinging to the hillsides. With every mile marker we passed, I felt like I was moving deeper into my mother's territory and further out of my father's shadow. I'd spent years avoiding anything that reminded me too much of her last months, locking those memories behind work and routine. Now I was chasing them down on purpose. Kaya dozed off for a bit, her head tilted against the window, while I drove in silence, the radio off. My thoughts ping-ponged between what I might find and what I already knew. The fake transfer, the missing credit, the way my dad had thrown that cup like it was nothing. Somewhere between government camp and the high desert, fear gave way to something else: resolve. If this storage unit held nothing, at least I would know. If it held proof, then I wasn't crazy and I wasn't powerless. Ben greeted us with a pale sun fighting through the clouds and a bite in the air that Portland's damp chill didn't have. The storage facility was on the outskirts of town, tucked behind a row of older warehouses. The buildings were low and concrete numbers stenciled above, metal roll-up doors, paint peeling at the edges. It wasn't the kind of place you stumbled on accidentally. Someone had to choose it. We checked in at the little office where a bored clerk barely glanced at my ID before waving us through. My mother had rented the unit under Montague's home market, not her own name. One more layer between her and my dad. We walked down a narrow lane between units until we found the number that matched the note she'd left in her notebook. My hand shook a little as I slid the key into the lock. The metal was cold and gritty. When it turned with a solid click, my throat tightened. My mother had held this same lock open once years ago, and now I was following her. The door groaned as I rolled it up. Inside, dust motes swam in the thin light from a single overhead bulb. Cardboard boxes were stacked in neat columns, some labeled in my mom's handwriting: Tax 1990, 1999, vendor contracts, family photos. Old holiday decorations leaned against a wall, a plastic snowman grinning at us through a film of dust. It smelled like cardboard and time. We started with the boxes marked for the store. In the back corner, half hidden behind a crate of faded signage, Kaya pulled out a heavy leather-bound ledger. "This is it," she said, voice low. She set it on an overturned crate and I opened it carefully. Pages of neat handwritten entries filled the book starting in 1974. Sales, purchases, notes about slow weeks and good months. In the early years, it was all my grandfather's handwriting. Then my mom's took over, steady, meticulous, familiar. And near the back there, it was my own scrawl on more recent entries' signatures, at the bottom of yearly summaries, proof that I'd been more than just a warm body behind a counter. Near the final section, a set of notarized pages were tucked into a plastic sleeve. I slipped them out, heart thudding. This wasn't the fake transfer Kaya had shown me. This was older. The document was a formal ownership agreement properly formatted with my mother's name, my father's, and mine. It laid out the structure clearly: Lydia Montague, 51%. Elliot Montague, 49%. Upon Lydia's death, her 51% passed to her daughter, Zara Lynx Montague, and could not be reassigned without Zara's written consent. There at the bottom were signatures: my grandfather's, my mother's, my father's, and mine. On a later amendment I barely remembered signing in a law office when I was in college, eyes still red from crying. The notary stamp was crisp with a name I didn't recognize. Everything about it felt solid, official, real. My chest ached, but in a different way now. I hadn't imagined my place in this. My mother had put it in writing. She'd built a wall of ink between our family's work and whatever plans my father might be talked into later. He had never told me that. He had let me believe I was lucky to be allowed to help. Kaya kept digging through the boxes and pulled out a smaller labeled envelope for Zara: "If you need the truth." My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a printed email chain between my mother and an attorney named Calder Dunn. In it, she laid out her fears that Serena, who was then just the woman Elliot's been seeing, might push him to move assets around, that Elliot could be talked into things he didn't fully understand. She asked Dunn to draw up documents that protected my share, and to keep copies in his office in case anything happened. Behind the printouts was a letter written in my mother's hand dated 2 weeks before she died. "Zara, if you ever feel like you're being pushed out of what we built, go to Calder Dunn in Salem. He has the real paperwork and knows what I wanted. Do not let anyone else tell you what your place is. Love, Mom." I read it 3 times, the words sinking into every hollow place inside me. All the times I'd been told I was overreacting, ungrateful, imagining things. My mother had predicted this exact scenario. She'd known my father's weaknesses, Serena's ambition, the way stories get twisted when money and control are on the line. And she'd trusted me to fight if I had to. I took the fake transfer document out of my bag and laid it next to the originals. Even to my untrained eye, the differences screamed at me. The formatting was off. The language was sloppy. The notary seal belonged to someone else entirely, a name I recognized from a flyer Serena had once left on the counter, a friendly neighborhood notary tied to a business she invested in. Lines that were required in the genuine agreement were missing here. It looked rushed, patched together by people who thought appearance mattered more than legality. "What do you think?" I asked Kaya. "I think your mom was smarter than all of them put together," she said. "And I think these pages could blow up everything they've tried to build on top of you." I gently gathered the ledger, my mother's letter, the email printouts, and the photocopy of the fake transfer into my backpack. They felt heavier than paper should, like they carried all the years I'd spent bending myself around other people's comfort. I can't take on Elliot and Serena and Jax by myself, I said. I don't know where to even start with this legally. You're not supposed to, Kaya replied. That's why your mom wrote his name down. She meant done. The attorney in Salem who'd been holding on to a version of my future for years while I pretended everything was fine. We did one last sweep of the unit, making sure we weren't missing anything crucial, then rolled the door down. Before I locked it, I looked back at the boxes at the bits of our family history stacked in cardboard. If she could see all of this, I murmured, if she knew how far they were willing to go, would she be proud of me for finally pushing back? Or sad that it took me this long? Kaya slipped her arm through mine. She'd be glad you showed up, she said. That's all any of us can do. Outside, the late afternoon light in Bend had turned golden, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. The unit number above the door glowed softly in the sun, ordinary and sacred at the same time. I turned the key in the lock, feeling something settle inside me. The truth had been sitting here, patient and silent, waiting for me to be brave enough to open the door. The next morning, I would drive to Salem to meet the man my mother had trusted when she realized she couldn't trust her own husband. I wasn't the girl who swallowed hot coffee and stayed quiet anymore. I had names, dates, signatures, and a story that finally made sense. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't just surviving my family. I was preparing to confront them. We left Bend before sunrise, the sky still that deep blue before it commits to morning. The highway to Salem was mostly empty headlights cutting through patches of fog that hugged the road. Kaya drove this time so I could flip through the copies we'd made at a 24-hour print shop, the original ownership agreement. My mother's letter, the email chain, with Calder done, and the fake transfer document with my forged signature. Every time my eyes landed on that crooked version of my name, something sharp twisted in my chest, but it was dulled by the weight of the real papers in my lap. For once, I had more than just suspicion and hurt feelings. I had proof. Dunn's office was in a small red brick building a few blocks from the courthouse in downtown Salem. It wasn't flashy, just a brass plaque by the door and clean windows, but there was a steadiness to it that made my shoulders drop a little as we walked in. A receptionist with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses asked our names, then smiled like she'd been expecting me. "He's just finishing a call," she said. "Go on back, second door on the left." I don't know what I thought a man who'd been holding pieces of my life for years would look like, but Calder Dunn fit somehow. Late 60s iron-gray hair neatly combed back a jawline that had seen a lot of arguments, eyes that missed nothing. He stood when we stepped in. "Zara Lynx," he said, like we were picking up a conversation from earlier that morning. "You look like your mother." That undid me more than anything else. "You knew I'd come," I managed. He nodded toward the chair across from his desk. "Your mother was very clear," he said. "She hoped you'd never need me. But she told me if things ever started to feel wrong eventually, you'd walk through that door." He unlocked a drawer and pulled out a black folder embossed with my mother's initials. My pulse roared in my ears as he opened it. Inside were crisp copies of the same ownership agreement I'd found in Bend, only cleaner, clearer. Lydia Montague, 51% passing to Zara Lynx upon her death. Elliot at 49, explicitly barred from altering the structure or transferring assets without my written consent. This Dunn said, tapping the page, is the governing document for Montague's home market. Filed, recorded, and valid. I slid the fake transfer across the desk. "Then what is this?" He put on a pair of reading glasses and studied it for a long moment, his mouth tightening. "A bad imitation," he said finally. "Wrong form, wrong language, wrong notary block. The dates don't line up with any legitimate filing cycles." This wasn't a mistake. Someone cobbled this together hoping nobody would look too closely. He pointed to the notary stamp. "And this woman, she's been on my radar." She was quietly investigated a few years back for helping a client clean up some inconvenient debts. That client's business was tied to one of Serena's old ventures. Hearing her name in his mouth made me shiver. "So this is them," I said. "Serena Jack's my dad. They're not just rewriting the story on Facebook. They're trying to rewrite it in the courthouse." Dunn sighed, leaning back. "Your father came to me after your mother passed," he said. "He asked if there was a way to simplify the ownership, maybe move everything into his name for clarity." I told him no. The documents were clear. Without your signature, nothing could be changed. He didn't like that answer, and I didn't see him again. The room felt suddenly smaller. It hit me then that the man who'd thrown coffee at me in his kitchen had been working on erasing me long before we ever shouted at each other. "So this isn't about one bad morning," I murmured. "This is about years." Dunn nodded. "Yes. They've been building their own version of reality for a while. The good news is, your mother was careful. And you've left a trail of your own tax filings, vendor contracts, payroll records, all signed by you. I've kept copies of some of those over the years." He opened another file and slid out invoices, contracts, even a scanned tax return, with my name on the line labeled responsible party. "I don't keep this kind of thing for every client," he said. "But your mother asked me to keep an eye out. I had a feeling others in your orbit wouldn't surrender easily." I sat there looking at the stack of paper that said I wasn't crazy, I wasn't disposable, and I wasn't helpless. "What can I actually do?" I asked. "Besides just knowing." Dunn steepled his fingers. "You can pursue criminal charges for fraud and forgery. You can seek an injunction to freeze any attempts to move or borrow against the business. You can reclaim full ownership of the store and its branding. And you can ask for damages." I swallowed. "And my dad? Could he go to jail?" Dunn didn't flinch. "If a prosecutor decided to bring charges and if a jury convicted him, yes. It's possible. But you don't have to push that far if you don't want to. The law gives you options. You choose how far to go." I thought of Elliot storming around that kitchen of him, letting Serena call my ideas cute in front of customers of him, never once telling me about the agreement that named me as my mother's successor. I thought of him sitting on the couch after my mom's funeral, staring at the TV while I closed the store so he could grieve in peace. My jaw tightened. "I don't want to destroy him," I said, "but I'm done letting him destroy me." Dunn nodded once, like that was the answer he'd expected. "Then we start with leverage," he said. "We send them a formal notice. We lay out everything we know and everything we can prove, and we give them one last chance to come to their senses before we take this public." He dictated to his assistant while I watched a letter addressed to Elliot, Serena, and Jax, summarizing the genuine ownership documents, the forged transfer, the misuse of the store's name in recent grant applications, and my intent to assert my rights. At the end, a deadline: 24 hours to respond and begin corrective action, or we would file in court. When we were done, Dunn walked us to the door. Outside, the Salem sky had finally opened up, rain pouring hard enough to bounce off the sidewalk. My phone buzzed in my pocket as we stepped into it. Serena's name lit the screen. "What are you doing, Zara? Remember who gave you a roof?" I stared at the message, thumbs itching to answer. Then I locked the phone and slid it back away. "You did," I thought, looking up into the rain. "And now I'm going to remind you it was never yours to give." The letter went out late that afternoon by email and overnight courier. By the time I woke up the next morning in my small rented room in Portland, the backlash had already begun. 3 missed calls from an unknown number, 2 emails from my bank. When I tried to pay for coffee with my debit card on the way to Dunn's office, it declined. I tried my backup card. Declined. The barista gave me an apologetic look while I fumbled with my phone, pulling up my banking app. A bright red banner sat at the top of my account: "Access restricted pending fraud investigation." I called the number on the back of my card from my car, fingers gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles hurt. After 15 minutes of hold music, a polite woman informed me that a co-owner on the joint account, my father, had reported unauthorized activity and requested a freeze. "We have to investigate," she said. "We can't discuss specifics without written consent from both parties." I laughed a short, bitter sound. "So he can lock me out with one phone call," I said, "but you can't tell me what he said." "I'm sorry, ma'am," she repeated. "It's procedure." By the time I walked into Dunn's office, I wasn't shaking anymore. I was cold. "They froze my main account," I said, dropping the printouts of the bank emails on his desk. "He told them I'd been stealing." Dunn scanned them, his mouth a hard line. "They're trying to suffocate you financially," he said. "Standard bully tactic. They push you toward panic so you'll take any deal they offer to make it stop." He turned to his assistant. "Draft an emergency motion. We'll ask the court to unfreeze her access based on the documents we have. Attach the ownership agreement and her tax returns. And call the bank's legal department directly. They move faster when a judge is CC'd." We were still outlining next steps when my phone rang again, this time from a number flagged as City of Portland. I put it on speaker. "This is Zara. Ms. Montague. This is Officer Reyes with the Portland Police Bureau," a male voice said, professional but weary. "We'd like you to come in and answer a few questions about a report filed by your father, Elliot Montague." My stomach flipped, but I kept my voice even. "What kind of report?" "He alleges you broke into his residence, removed property from the home and the business, and made verbal threats toward his wife and stepson." Dunn's eyebrows shot up. He leaned toward the phone. "This is Attorney Calder Dunn," he said. "Ms. Montague is my client. We'll be happy to cooperate. We'll also be bringing documentation regarding her legal interest in the business and evidence she has not been to that residence since the morning she left voluntarily." Reyes hesitated. "That's fine," he said finally. "We just need to get her statement on record." An hour later, we were in a bland interview room at the precinct, beige walls and a scuffed table that had seen too many bad conversations. Reyes flipped open a folder, asked his questions. Where had I been on certain dates? Did I take anything from the house or store after leaving? Had I threatened Serena or Jax? For each answer, Dunn slid something across the table: my gas receipts from Ben, time-stamped security footage from the storage facility, screenshots of texts showing Serena inviting me to dinner later that week. Reyes's posture shifted as the stack of paper in front of him grew. By the end, he was rubbing the bridge of his nose. "We'll need to follow up," he said, closing the folder. "But it appears there may be more to this situation than the initial report suggested." On the way out of the station, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Serena. "Dinner at Riverside Grill on Friday. Just family. Come talk like adults instead of dragging strangers into our business." Kaya, who had come along and waited in the lobby, frowned when I told her. "Don't go," she said. "It's a trap. They want to corner you emotionally." Dunn shook his head. "Let them talk," he said. "Keep your temper. Listen carefully. People who think they're in control tend to confess more than they realize. Riverside Grill was one of those places my father loved to brag about, all dark wood and white tablecloths overlooking the Willamette River. When I arrived, the hostess frowned at my name, then pointed me toward a back corner. "They're already seated," she said. Elliot sat in the middle of the booth, like a king on a throne. Serena was on his right in a jewel-toned dress, Jax on his left in a blazer that still had fold lines in the sleeves. An extra chair at the end faced all three of them. "There she is," Serena said, voice bright and brittle. "Our runaway." I sat without commenting. A waiter came, took drink orders. They made small talk as if this were a normal family dinner, asking about the weather, about traffic, about anything except the reason we were there. Finally, Elliot cleared his throat. "We need to address your behavior," he said. "You've been acting like we owe you something, like we haven't given you everything you have. A home, a place in the business. And now you're dragging lawyers and cops into our private affairs." I let him talk. He went on about sacrifice, about how he'd worked himself to the bone for us, about how family means sometimes you give more than you get. Serena chimed in about loyalty, about how disappointed she was that I couldn't be happy for Jax's success. He's done so much for the store, she said. He's the one out front building relationships, carrying the name. And you can't stand that, can you? I sipped my water and let their version of reality crash against the quiet I'd built inside myself since Bend. I wasn't here to argue. I was here to listen. Before the entrees arrived, Jax leaned back in his chair with a smirk. You should have seen the look on the dealer's face when I pulled up in my new car, he said. He couldn't believe a local market owner rolled in with something that nice. He said the make and model, and my spine went rigid. It was my car. The same one still sitting outside with my coat in the back seat. New car, huh? I asked, voice light. What plates? He rattled off the number without thinking. Under the table, I unlocked my phone, pulled up the DMV portal, and typed it in. The record popped up in seconds. 3 days after I'd left my father's house, ownership of the vehicle had been transferred from me to one Jax Mercer, marked as a gift. There was a digital copy of the transfer request attached with my name, typed neatly under a signature that looked a whole lot like the one on that fake store document. For a moment, the restaurant noise faded. Serena was saying something about how good kids deserve nice things. Elliot was nodding along, eyes on his wine glass. They really believed their own story so much that they'd started forgetting to hide the seams. I slid my phone back into my bag and set my napkin on the table. I'm not doing this, I said softly, standing up. Not this version of the truth. Serena's smile snapped. Sit down, Zara, she hissed. Don't make a scene. I met my father's eyes. You taught me to stand up when something wasn't fair, I said. Maybe you thought I only needed that lesson for other people. I pushed my chair in. I will never bow to this again. Then I turned and walked away. Behind me, I heard Serena mutter, always so dramatic, but no one followed. Outside, the night air felt cooler than it should have for early summer. I handed my ticket to the valet and wrapped my arms around myself, the lights from the river reflecting off the windows. A few minutes later, the valet jogged up, slightly out of breath, holding not one but 2 key fobs. Ms. Montague, he asked, we have your car right out front, and this was just updated in the system. He glanced at the note in his hand. It says here there was a legal correction on the title. Ownership reverted to you as of this afternoon. We're supposed to give you both keys. I stared at him, then at the keys. Dunn must have pushed the DMV correction through just in time. They'd tried to steal my car on paper the same way they'd tried to steal my store. But this time, the system was snapping back into place before they even knew it. I took the keys, feeling the weight of them settle into my palm. Thank you, I said. As I slid behind the wheel, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't look like the girl who'd stood in a kitchen letting hot coffee drip down her shirt while her father screamed. I looked like someone who'd finally realized she didn't need their permission to exist. As I pulled away from the restaurant, I didn't check the mirror to see if they were watching. I already knew one thing for sure: whatever war they thought they were starting, this was only the opening move. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't on their side of the battlefield. After Riverside Grill, the silence in my little apartment felt different. It wasn't the stunned, hollow quiet from the day my dad threw coffee at me. It was sharper, clearer, like the stillness right before a verdict is read. I sat in the dark for a long time, shoes still on, staring at nothing. I wasn't burning with rage anymore. I was done begging for recognition. This wasn't about them loving me. It was about what was true and what I was willing to do to defend it. The next morning, I walked into Dunn's office and found a thick stack of paper already waiting on his desk. This, he said, tapping it, is our story in black and white. Inside were the originals from Bend, the ownership agreement naming me as the primary heir, my mother's letter copies of contracts and tax returns with my signature, the fake transfer with my forged name, the DMV records showing my car had been gifted to Jax and then corrected back, and the grant applications where Serena and Jax had used the store's name and history to chase money they had no right to. Say the word done, said calmly, and we take all of this to court. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a name I didn't recognize until I read the first line, a neighbor from my dad's subdivision, someone on the HOA board. She'd seen my post about reclaiming my story and attached a PDF. I thought you should have this, she wrote. It felt off. It was Jax's recent application for a neighborhood beautification grant. In it, he called himself the second-generation founder of Montague's, claimed 10 years of management experience, and described designing programs I knew he'd never even showed up for. Lying to the public was one thing. Lying on a grant tied to city money was another. Later that day, another message came in, this one from an old employee of my mother's, a woman who'd worked the deli counter when I was still doing homework at the back table. She'd dug up a screenshot of an email Serena had sent my mom 5 years earlier, urging her to transfer the store fully into the Mercer family to protect it from future risk. My mother's reply was clipped and firm: absolutely not. No one had ever told me about that exchange. Serena hadn't started circling our store after my mom died. She'd been circling it while my mom was still alive. I forwarded everything to Dunn. He read it all, then looked up at me. They're overreaching, he said. And they're sloppy. That's good for us. He explained that, before filing suit, the law allowed for a formal mediation session. We'll go, he said, but not to beg. We go to set terms. If they're smart, they'll take them. The mediation suite was a glass-walled conference room that smelled faintly of coffee and carpet cleaner. Elliot, Serena, and Jax were already there when we walked in, clustered on one side of the table with a young lawyer who looked like he'd gotten his bar card last week. They wore their Sunday best and brittle expressions, trying to project control. My dad wouldn't quite meet my eyes. Serena did her stare sharp enough to cut. Jax bounced his leg under the table. A neutral mediator went through the ground rules, then asked Dunn to summarize our position. He didn't rush. He laid out the timeline: my grandfather's founding of the store, my mother's years of running it, the ownership agreement naming me as her successor, my work keeping it afloat after my dad's stroke. Then he slid my mother's letter across the table and read the key lines out loud, the part where she said I was to be the one to carry on what she'd built, the part where she warned against anyone trying to push me out. Elliot's hands trembled. Serena's jaw clenched. Jax scoffed. She barely did anything, he blurted. She just hid in the back with her laptop. Dunn didn't even look at him. Instead, he opened a slim folder and laid out printed photos and stills, pulled from security cameras and local news segments, me painting walls, hauling boxes, talking to vendors, cutting a ribbon at the remodel that the article had credited to Jax alone. Proof, frame by frame, of how conveniently their memories had edited me out. Then Dunn went point by point through the legal problems. The forged transfer, the fraudulent car title change, the grant application with invented experience, the false police report. Each of these, he said, is independently actionable. Together, they form a pattern that any prosecutor or civil judge will recognize. He let that hang in the air. My father finally spoke, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I just wanted to help Jax, he muttered. He's young. He needed a leg up. Serena jumped in, leaning forward. Zara never wanted real responsibility, she said. She always hid when things got hard. We did what we had to do to keep the store alive. I met her eyes. I took responsibility the day my mom died, I said quietly. I just didn't stand in front of cameras while I did it. You all were happy to let me carry the weight as long as my name wasn't on the sign. The mediator turned to me. What would a resolution look like for you? He asked. I'd been thinking about that for days. They transfer full ownership of the business name, the physical store, and all related branding back to me, I said. They withdraw every grant and application where they used the store's history or my work as their own. They stop any effort to borrow against the business. They sign a written statement to the community, acknowledging me as the rightful heir and operator. And they do not contact me again, not for holidays, not for birthdays, not to talk things through. We're done. Serena's lawyer cleared his throat, then slid a new piece of paper across the table. We believe there's already an agreement covering some of these issues, he said. Signed by Ms. Montague years ago. It was another supposed contract, my name typed neatly above a pixelated signature. Dunn looked at it for all of 10 seconds, then smiled without humor. This is a cut-and-paste job, he said. The signature block is lifted directly from one of her tax filings. The font changes mid-line. If you submit this in court, you'll be handing us another charge. The young lawyer flushed. Serena went pale. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the mediator suggested a break. When we came back, the energy in the room had shifted. The bravado was gone, replaced by something closer to fear. They might still have believed their version of the story, but the law didn't. It took 3 more hours, a lot of muttering between Serena and their lawyer, and one slammed fist from Jax before it was over. In the end, they agreed to every condition. Elliot signed first, his hand shaking so hard the pen scratched the paper. Serena signed with her mouth pressed in a hard line like the ink itself tasted bitter. Jax signed last, looking everywhere but at me. The mediator collected the documents, made copies, and slid one set back to Dunn, who turned and placed them in my hands. From this moment, he said quietly, you have everything they tried to take from you. But the more important part is this, you have yourself back. I walked out of that glass room into the hallway and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not victory exactly, not joy. Just a clean, wide sense of space where the weight used to be. For the first time since my mom died, I was nobody's understudy. I was free. I wasn't there when they went home, but I heard about it later from a neighbor who couldn't resist sending a play-by-play. Elliot, Serena, and Jax walked into the Portland house like they always had, expecting their world to still be arranged around them. Instead, they found the living room stripped of anything tied to the store. Awards, framed photos, branded merchandise, all gone. A man in a navy suit was sitting calmly on the couch, briefcase by his feet. He introduced himself as an associate from Dunn's office and handed them a checklist. I'm here to collect the remaining business records and keys, he said. Just fulfilling the agreement you signed. While they argued and sputtered, I was 2 hours away in Astoria, standing in the middle of a small apartment that smelled like salt air and fresh paint. I'd told Dunn I couldn't stay in Portland. Too many ghosts in every grocery aisle, too much history at every stoplight. Astoria was cooler, quieter, the kind of town where you could hear the foghorn at night and see the river from your kitchen window if you craned your neck. I moved in with 3 suitcases, my laptop, my mother's notebook, and a sense that maybe, just maybe, my life could belong to me from here on out. My days became simple in a way that felt almost luxurious. I picked up freelance design work, helping small businesses in town refresh their interiors. I jogged along the waterfront in the mornings, cold wind burning my lungs in a way that made me feel alive. I made coffee slowly because no one was rushing me. No one stormed into the kitchen demanding anything. My money was my own again. So was my time. On paper, the resolution moved faster than I expected. The car was retitled firmly in my name. The business registrations were changed, erasing Serena and Jax's claims and affirming mine. I hired a small forensic accounting team to dig through the last few years of the store's finances. They found questionable expenses, padded invoices, grant funds spent on things that had nothing to do with the community projects they'd promised. I could have taken all of that to law enforcement, pushed for charges, watched them squirm under a spotlight. Instead, I made a different choice. We documented everything, cleaned it up, and quietly made things right where we could. I didn't want to spend the next 5 years in court. I wanted my life back. When I was ready, I drove back to Portland, stood in front of the building that had once broken my heart, and unlocked the door as its rightful owner. The old sign came down. In its place, I hung a new one, Link's Market. No Montague, no Mercer. Just me. Inside, I redesigned the space the way I'd always wanted without anyone telling me to tone it down or make it more Jax's style. Warm wood local art, a corner with comfortable chairs, and a shelf of free books for anyone who needed a quiet place to sit. The first week we reopened, customers I hadn't seen in months started drifting back in. Some did double takes when they saw me behind the counter. One older woman shook her head and said, "I always wondered where you went. It never felt right when they pretended you'd never been here." I smiled and told her I'd just had to step away for a while. The full story was too big for the checkout line. One afternoon, a plain brown box showed up on my doorstep in Astoria. No return address, no note. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a coffee mug, the same kind my dad had thrown that morning in the kitchen, or maybe the exact one. It was clean handle glued back where it had cracked porcelain smooth under my fingers. There were 100 things that box could have meant: regret, guilt, denial. I didn't try to decode it. I set the mug on a shelf in my living room between two travel books I hadn't had the courage to open yet. Not as a shrine, not as a wound, just as proof that it had happened and that I was still here. Word about what I'd been through traveled quietly. A librarian in Astoria reached out and asked if I'd speak at a small event about financial independence and family boundaries. I almost said no. Then I thought about all the nights I'd lain awake wondering if I was crazy. I said yes. Standing in front of a dozen women in a meeting room that smelled like paper and lemon cleaner, I told them about being erased from my family's story about the hot coffee, about fake signatures and threats, and walking away with nothing but my car and a key to a storage unit. I didn't name names or drag my family through the mud. I just described how it feels when people you love decide your only acceptable role is silent support. In the back row, a woman wiped her cheeks and whispered to her friend, "That's my story too." For the first time, I realized my survival wasn't just mine. It was a map someone else might need. Months later, in a grocery store in Astoria, I turned into the frozen foods aisle and froze for an entirely different reason. My dad was standing there staring at a bag of peas like it held all the answers. He looked older, shoulders, rounded hair, thinner. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the door. Our eyes met. For a heartbeat, the world went quiet. He didn't look through me, and he didn't rush over. He just held my gaze with something that wasn't anger and wasn't quite apology either. Just reality. I gave him a small nod. Not forgiveness. Not invitation. Just acknowledgement that we shared a past and that he no longer had any say over my future. He blinked, nodded once back, and turned away. That was it. No speech, no scene. Some wars don't end with one side winning. They end when one person simply lays down their part in it and walks in another direction. That night, back in my apartment with the salt air sneaking in through the cracked window, I opened my laptop and created a new document. At the top of the blank page, I typed Chapter 1, The Day. My father threw a coffee cup at me. I sat there watching the cursor blink. I didn't feel vengeful. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Some families are built on love. Others are built on control and fear held together by silence and the hope that no one will question the script. I had spent most of my life trying to fit inside a house that was never really built for me. Now finally, I'd stepped outside. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from a door that keeps hitting you on the way in and start building a life somewhere it doesn't.